An invading government, an invading army? Yes, probably, because England couldn't really afford, and when I say England, I mean the authorities, the powers that be, they couldn't afford to have a Scotland on the northern borders. It was very likely going to have an alliance with France. So who knows what might have happened. But I think there could have been success if enough people in Scotland had been confident enough they would have declared for Charlie. And a lot of people said if you would just change your religion, a lot of people would support you. And he did later in life. He converted to Protestantism. He had a secret visit to London where he converted to Protestantism. So he wasn't certainly wasn't wedded to the Catholic Church.
Did not know that one. But okay, so we've really been talking mostly about the history of the way that they describe it, the history of great men and great battles and so on. But when you saw the soldiers' letters and things, what were the things that struck you? What did they talk about? The people that were fighting and the people that were involved in the armies, the more ordinary level of people. What struck you most about what they were saying?
That they were so homely and domestic and so affectionate. And it was things like sell the cow and make sure you get a good price for her. And you've not to worry about the young lad we took with us. We're going to keep him at the back so he'll be out of any trouble. And if so and so, if we go near Dumfries, then we'll go and visit Auntie Jeannie in Dumfries. And this lovely letter about from the man to his girlfriend at Fort Augustus, saying all that ails me is the wanting of you. And every time I say that, I can feel my blood running cold because it's just so touching. And also, of course, the other thing that makes my blood run cold is that when they sent these letters, which were sent from the camp at Moffat on their way south, a lot of them said, "Don't worry, we'll be home by Christmas." And you think, oh, right, taking us right up to the First World War, and you think, have all soldiers in all wars thought that? I presume quite often they march away thinking we're going to have an adventure, and then they quickly realise what the reality of the adventure might be. It was those homely touches, the domestic touches.
Were there any points where they talked about the politics of what they were involved in these letters? Or yeah, you said the homely touches. Obviously, it's very moving, but were there any points where they were talking about the political side of it?
No, it wasn't political, but one man who was writing to his spouse, she was Jean, she'd obviously said to him, "Please come home." And he'd said, "But this is war, and this is the only time that a man can show his dedication to his master." So he was voluntarily following his laird or lord. But they didn't comment about the politics, no.
That's quite interesting. So it was, like you said, they were told to follow, so they followed. They weren't questioning in that sense, at least not in writing.
At least not in writing, but that's the other thing you see. People might have been reluctant to commit things to paper. And these letters were intercepted. Somebody intercepted them. So if you'd said something really overtly in favour of Bonnie Prince Charlie, then you were adding to the evidence. Because afterwards, when people were tried, there was evidence given against them that they had been at an audience that Charlie had given, or they had been seen wearing tartan, which was taken to be a sign that you were a Jacobite, that sort of thing. People in the 18th century were quite cautious about what they committed to paper.
Censorship, and well, yeah,
Well, self-censorship in a way, or actually keeping yourself safe. There are a lot of letters, again, in the higher ups in the Stuarts saying, "Burn this letter." And quite often the letter hasn't been burned. But I think a lot of stuff was destroyed because it would have been incriminating.
we've only really talked about the men, and you wrote a book, Damn Rebel Bitches, about the women involved in this story. And we should maybe start at the beginning. What sort of involvement was there from women in this, apart from, we've got wives and mothers and that sort of element that you always get in war, and you're talking about the letters that the men were sending back. But what other ways were women involved in all of this?
Well, some of what academic historians would call elite women were raising regiments for the prince. Not too many on the other side in Scotland, but most of them kind of going out and beating up. And there was Margaret Ogilvy, who stood at the Mercat Cross in Cooper Angus with a sword in her hand, who sounds as though she was having a whale of a time, and recruiting people for the Jacobite army. My thing is that, people say how could women have been involved? They didn't even have the vote. Well, most men didn't even have the vote. And I think women could be very influential in persuading men to go out. They could also be very useful in passing on messages because women were less likely to be suspected of doing something nefarious. And there was a woman called Barbara Strachan in Aberdeenshire, and she was the postmistress. See, I find this incidentally interesting that we've also been always been told that women were staying at home and stirring the porridge, but a lot of them were out there in the workplace, and she was passing on messages. They were also, and this is really underestimated, they were, to use a cliche, they were keeping the home fires burning. And that was harder in those days. You know, if you had a farm or you were out in the country, you were having to milk the cow and make the cheese and make sure there were supplies in. Some women were collecting weapons and hiding weapons. So they were active in all sorts of ways that often don't get credited. And afterwards, they were active in helping and hiding. There was a woman in Inverness, Anne Mackay, who hid some Jacobite soldiers, and she was taken to the guardhouse and was interrogated, kept on her feet for several days, which gave her really painful legs. Her 17-year-old son was beaten up so severely that he died. And that was because she was trying to save young Jacobite soldiers who were hiding from the Redcoats. And there was Anne Leith, who's my heroine, who personal heroine, who went out to Culloden the day of the battle with two other women with bandages and cloths to try and help the wounded. And I get really impassioned about Anne Leith. I've got nothing against Flora MacDonald, but I'm wondering why there isn't a statue to Anne Leith anywhere, because that was so brave, because the Redcoats were, killing and raping. So these women were really risking a lot. If you're going to ask me what their politics were, it's hard to know. It's hard to know whether Anne Mackay, the poor woman from Skye, was a committed Jacobite, or if she just thought, I don't want this young lad taken away and hanged. Many of them would have had Jacobite views, but a lot of it would have been loyalty to your own people, loyalty to your own folk, and compassion for those who were on the run.
And what do we know about the aftermath? The people had to hide and there were executions and so on, but what happened where, the banning of tartan and things like that, all this came in? Is the kind of the normal story on that fairly accurate? Basically any outward show of Scottish culture became an offence quite quickly.
Yes, I think that's basically true. I can't remember when it came in, but it's a couple of years later. But then again, the Black Watch were allowed to keep tartan, and there's a dance, a Highland dance about someone trying to kick off their trousers because they don't want to wear trousers, they want to wear the kilt. Yeah, I think it was quite vicious, and there was an oath that people were made to swear that they would never wear tartan. And it was full of horrible things that if I do this, then I will die alone in a foreign land, far from my people. I think London and the establishment had been terrified by these Bare-arsed Banditti, as they called them, and they thought they had to destroy the whole way of life. As I say, I'm not terribly romantic about Highland chiefs myself because, some of them could be quite venal. People always talk about the end of the clan system. I'm not sure that I would have liked to have been a woman in a Highland clan because I don't think I would have had much independence or much power.
Could you expand on that? What was the sort of situation for women in Highland clans?
Well, it's difficult to tell because I wasn't there. I'm not Highland, so somebody could come down on me like a ton of bricks for this. But I just see women as being the helpmeets and not really having an awful lot of power unless they were elite women, unless they were the laird's wife or the laird's daughter. But I think women were expected to marry who their fathers and mothers maybe, and who the clan chief thought it would be handy for them to marry. So I don't think it was this idyllic sitting with your spinning wheel out by the burn looking at the bonny purple heather. I don't think it was always like that.
What happened in 1759? There were possibilities that Charlie wanted to start again and have another invasion but this time of England. Have you written about that?
I haven't written about that one, no. He had, of course, tried before. There was almost a 44. where they were going to go for London, and they were going to try and go for a coup, as had happened in 1688 when William of Orange came over. I don't know so much about the 1759 situation. What is interesting, I think, is that when we go to Culloden now, we see it as just the final battle, the last stand. But Charlie, and to a certain extent, many of the Jacobites obviously didn't see it like that. They thought it was still possible to change it. But of course, the further away you got from the Stuarts having been on the throne, the more the House of Hanover, it was a fait accompli. And then it depended what France was doing and what was in France's interest, whether they wanted to help Scotland or not. So I think it all kind of fizzled out from that point of view about that time.
So history is always something that is in revision. More evidence comes to light, we have to look at it again. And also the fact that, as you've stated on your blog, I noticed that it's very difficult not to view events in the past from the point of view of your own time. It's almost impossible not to.
Absolutely.
But if you think there is something major that we should change about how we view the 45, just as a last final point, what do you think we need to change in the public mindset about how the 45 is viewed?
I think we have to stop seeing Bonnie Prince Charlie as a doomed romantic figure. To an extent, that's how his life played out. I think we have to look at the people who supported him. I think we do have to look at why many people in Scotland wanted to support him or chose to support him, because he was the only way they were going to get Scottish independence back. I think that has really been downplayed, really downplayed. And then, of course, when we get on, we get into the height of the British Empire and Scottish regiments in the British Empire, and that was the narrative. It was the gallant Highlanders. But I think lots of people back then wanted independence back. It was as simple as that, and they saw it as a way of getting independence back. I would like to retrieve Bonnie Prince Charlie's reputation a bit, because, as I said, he wasn't an idiot. He was well educated. I think he used people to get what he wanted, which was the throne. But I think we need to try and not look at him either romantically or debunking him. It's trying to get at the truth. But as you say, it's very hard, because if you're inclined towards nationalism yourself, you will kind of look at this look at it from this nationalist perspective. But I read a review by Michael Fry of a new book on the Jacobites, and he's just seeing it as a little blip, a little romantic blip. And it wasn't. It was part of what was going on in Europe at the time. It was part of people striving, and we're pre-democracy, but those sort of ideas are beginning to build, and then building up to the radicals later in the 18th century and in 1820.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming on, Maggie. That's been great. And hopefully we can do it again on another topic, because you're quite a prolific writer. So there's certain other things I'd like to pick your brains about, if that's all right.
That would be fine.
Okay. Thank you, Maggie.
You're welcome.
So that was Maggie Craig. I hope you enjoyed that. Just wanted to let you know that apart from the Scottish Independence podcast and the Scotland's Missing Histories podcast, there's a new show in the rotation now, which is the Turnout podcast. It's got its own page on Facebook. If you just search on Facebook, the Turnout podcast. And the first episode came out a little while ago and featured an interview with Mark Franklin, who was a survivor of the Hillsborough disaster. So if you haven't heard that one, you might want to check it out. And just the final thing is that, as is usual on all podcasts we produce here, the guest gets to choose the song at the end. And given the subject matter, Maggie thought this was the most appropriate to play us out with.
The deal have we gotten for a king, but a wee German laddie. When we get to Birmingham, he was delving in his sherdy. He was shooing kale and pooing leeks, I but the hose and but the bricks. We is beggar dudsy clicks, you wee German laddie. He's clapped in a good man's tail, this wee German laddie, and he's put forth the foreign trash and doubled them in his sherdy. He's put the rose o' English loons, broke the harp o' Irish clunes, or fizzle taps full jagged stones, you wee German laddie. Come up amongst where Hieland Hills, you wee but German levy, and see how Stuart's lang can thrive. We've doubled in, we're Gerby, but if a stack you dare to prove, at the yoke and no pillow, we'll brack your sceptre, oh